The next release for Adobe Commerce and Magento Open Source is 2.4.4. It's been a long time in the making. It's the first release since Adobe have started to be more open about the direction they're taking Magento, and recently the release date has been pushed back by more than a month. It seems like Adobe are gearing up for some pretty major changes, so what can we understand from the release notes? To me, it feels like Adobe are treating this release as the start of the new journey and direction they're taking Adobe Commerce and Magento Open Source. And I'm expecting it to be a pretty big release in terms of code changes. So it is interesting to look at the release notes to get an understanding of the changes we can expect. You can find the Commerce and Open Source release notes linked to in the associated blog post, but you might actually have a hard time tracking them down in a search engine. That's because Adobe have added canonical links on both pages pointing to the non-beta version of the release notes. These pages don't actually exist though, so the end result is that search engines basically aren't indexing the beta release notes at all, and that's making them harder to find. In today's video, I'm going to be looking through the release notes for Commerce and Open Source, giving you the important points and changes so that you can be prepared for the upgrade. There are going to be some points in here that need to be addressed by your store developer, while other points will be more general interest and won't need any action taking. First area I'll talk about from the release notes is security enhancements. So in 2.4.4 is a usual raft of security fixes and changes, and included in this is the changes that were released as a critical security patch 2 or 3 weeks ago by Adobe. So when you come to upgrade to 2.4.4, you will actually be able to remove these critical security patch changes because they're actually included in this release already. Another area they talk about is integration tokens. So it says that integration tokens can no longer be used for API bearer token authentication, and it goes on to say that this behaviour is disabled by default, but it can be enabled through the command line or in admin. So for those who don't know, there's two ways that you can authenticate with the API. So any calls coming into Magento where you want to have an external system talk to Magento and pull data or push data to the Magento install, you can either authenticate using these integration tokens, or you can authenticate using a username and password combination. So the reason that Adobe have disabled this integration token functionality by default is because once you've got an integration token, it never changes, and you can use that for the duration that token exists. So it's less secure than sending a username password combination. In the case of doing that, you get a different bearer token every time, but with an integration token, the bearer token never changes. So you can understand why, but it's just worth being aware that this is disabled by default, and if you've got any external systems that use these integration tokens, you'll need to go in and enable this functionality again before it will work, or better yet, switch to username password for authentication. So next they say that support for reCAPTCHA has been added for coupon codes, so a minor addition, but still noteworthy, still a useful one. After that they say that Swagger is now disabled by default when Adobe Commerce is in production mode, or Magento Open Source is in production mode. So Swagger is documentation essentially, so that you as a developer can see the methods of or the structure of all API calls that you can send into Magento, and the structure of the data as a response from that call. You do need to authenticate with Swagger to see all of the API calls, so it's not insecure, but I think it's sensible all the same to have this disabled by default in production mode. Something to be aware of if you have third parties that do API integrations for you. and they may look at your production system. It's worth making them aware they won't be able to unless you want to enable it again. Personally, I would say leave it disabled on production, but you can enable it again if you want to. And last point of interest in this section is HTTPS is now enabled by default on the storefront. So that means that cart and checkout, these kind of pages will be served as HTTPS by default. It won't mean HTTPS everywhere. So if you want to do that, you need to change both your secure and insecure base URLs to HTTPS, and that will give you HTTPS everywhere, regardless of the setting of whether you have enabled to use security on the front end or not, because it will always use that HTTPS base URL. Okay, so next area is platform enhancements. So the headline here really is that 244 adds support for PHP 8.1. PHP 8.1 or PHP 8 in general brings some really great additions to the table. It brings better performance, it brings quite a few really good improvements to coding structure and actually writing PHP code. So that's a really good upgrade. It doesn't really say whether support is going to remain for PHP 7 versions. It may be that support for PHP 7 remains in 244, but I would kind of expect possibly it to be the case that PHP 7 is only designed as an interim version when you upgrade to 2.4 to allow you to get to 244. Keeps PHP 7, and then when you're on 244 then you upgrade to PHP 8.1. They haven't said that, but it doesn't say there's any support for PHP 7, so we'll see in the final release notes what's said about that, but that would be sort of my expectation, but yeah, we'll see. So after that, he says that Adobe Commerce 244 provides support for Elasticsearch 7.16 and OpenSearch 1.2. Adobe Commerce merchants with deployments hosted on premises can use either solution. However, OpenSearch is now the default search engine for Adobe Commerce 244 deployments hosted in the cloud. All customers with cloud deployments who upgrade to 244 must use OpenSearch. So for those who don't know, OpenSearch is basically a branch of Elasticsearch. It's created by Amazon and they provide it as a search service, a cloud-based search service. So you have to make a call external to your system to retrieve search results. So it's effectively a SaaS service, believe it or not. So yeah, that's the first one, isn't it, really, that they're saying you've got to now use this SaaS service. It's not, I haven't been able to find information to say whether it's tied into Adobe Sensei. Didn't seem to be anything about that, because that was what Adobe have said that they're going to be moving customers onto, is search, SaaS based search using Adobe Sensei, but I'm not sure if this is linked. I haven't been able to find any information about that. It doesn't appear to be, so that may still be coming, but basically they're saying you've got to use this SaaS based service, OpenSearch, for your search results if you're on a cloud version of Commerce. So yeah, that's kind of what I predicted. We'll see what happens on that front in the future, but yeah, that's the first service you're being forced to move to functionality outside of the code base. So the next section is performance and scalability enhancements. So here Adobe introduce a new feature called asynchronous orders, which they claim can process 60,000 orders per hour, whereas previously it was only 10,000 orders per hour. Then it says the new multiple consumers feature supports scaling the number of message queue customers on a single cloud instance and increases the number of orders processed per hour. So we're already seeing, aren't we, again, a shift towards a cloud focused away from hosted. This is very likely to be SaaS, as Adobe have already said that new major functionality is going to be outside the current code base. A small section in the release notes, but one which I think is actually quite important, is vendor bundled extensions. And this says, with the exception of Braintree, all vendor bundled extensions have been removed from the Adobe Commerce 244 codebase. Merchants should migrate to the official extensions which are available on the Commerce Marketplace. So for those who don't know, Braintree is a payment method. It's interesting that they call that out specifically and say that that one is remaining. So what about other payment methods like PayPal, for instance? Is that going to have to be installed separately? Is that still going to be a part of the core? I don't know. And what about shipping methods? So UPS, FedEx, DHL, things like that. Are they going to remain part of the core? It's not really clear exactly what this means, vendor bundled extensions, but the fact that it calls out just Braintree makes me suspect that other similarly focused extensions which are currently part of the core are going to come out of the core, and you'll have to install them yourself as separate add-ons, separate extensions from the marketplace. So that's interesting. I mean, it could affect shipping methods, payment methods, it could affect even things like Google Analytics and AdWords. We'll see when it actually comes out, but that's an interesting one to me. Next up is fixed issues. So there's a whole host of minor bug fixes, as there always is in every Magento release. Lots of community contribution, which is great. So it's good to see all these bug fixes come in. There's still a huge number on the GitHub issues page, but you know, the more bug fixes that get into the core, the better. So that's kind of really a wrap up of the main points of the release notes really for 244, and there's some interesting points in there, isn't there, to look at. And for me, there's quite a lot in there in these release notes that confirms my prediction at the end of my recent blog post on the direction commerce is headed, and the fact that they're already pushing merchants onto SaaS solutions in preference of self-hosted functionality is really interesting. So we knew that was coming, or sort of I predicted that was coming. It always seemed very likely, but it is interesting that already cloud customers, you no longer have the option for some functionality of going back to hosted functionality. You are now being forced to use cloud-based functionality. So the release does also bring some good additions. So support for PHP 8.1 is really good. That should give stores a really good boost in performance. And you know, the asynchronous orders functionality, if it lives up to the claims on the release notes, it does sound potentially interesting. But if you remember from the recent blog post where I looked at the Adobe Developers Conference keynote, Adobe have told us there that there wouldn't be any new functionality coming to the current code base. So this leads me to only logically conclude that this new asynchronous order functionality is going to be SaaS only. Given the fact that it's also not even mentioned in the open source release notes, really supports that to my mind. I think that's probably exactly the same also for OpenSearch. It doesn't look like exactly the same offering that Adobe have talked about with Adobe Sensei, but and it is actually talked about in the open source release notes, but I kind of wonder if that's just an oversight, as the context for this is completely around the cloud offering of commerce. So basically don't expect any significant level of customization to be possible with asynchronous orders or OpenSearch, because they're now SaaS offerings. I'm also slightly concerned as to what exactly the removal of vendor bundled extensions means. It seems like this is a push by Adobe to begin to slim down the core code base, allowing them to move more towards lighter LTS releases. So this in turn allows them to concentrate much more on the SaaS side, reducing potential support issues by moving support responsibility for currently built-in functionality probably to third parties. I wouldn't be surprised if we do see Adobe close a whole bunch of tickets on GitHub after this release, as support for many of those issues won't any longer be their responsibility. Currently there are just over 1200 open tickets. Let's see how many there are after 244 is released. So overall, there are some changes that are worth discussing here. In my blog post in January on the future of open source, I did speculate that Adobe were quite advanced in their implementation of commerce with Experience Cloud, and that certainly does seem to be the case here. My expectation is that future releases will continue to slim the code base by stripping out core functionality. It seems like this is the case even in this release with the removal of vendor bundled extensions. I also think that Adobe will continue to add more SaaS services to give either new or replacement functionality in preparation for current codebase functionality being stripped out entirely at some point in the future. That about wraps up my thoughts on these release notes, but please do let me know your thoughts in the comments. Thanks for watching this video and the associated blog post, and if you're in need of a Magento developer to do your store's 244 upgrade, you can find one at developerconnection.co.uk. It's quick, free and connects you with quality Magento devs from across the UK.